At year's beginning and at year's end, Frenchmen clashed with Frenchmen over Algerian self-determination, the policy carried forward by de Gaulle with stirring moral and physical courage. In South Africa, native protest flared against apartheid and passbook laws. 100 died when police fired on demonstrators at Sharpeville. Then came the attempted assassination of Premier Verwoerd by a white farmer. Verwoerd survived and apartheid continued, but throughout 1960, all Africa was in ferment. Independence came to over a dozen states peaceably, but in the Belgian Congo, freedom was followed by rioting and army mutiny, a reign of terror and disorder. United Nations troops were called in to avert total chaos. For months, the political pattern kept changing with kaleidoscopic speed until pro-red Premier Lumumba was seized by the forces of strongman Colonel Mobutu. But the struggle for power was far from over. In Japan, fanatic students and leftist groups rioted for days on end, seeking to block the Mutual Defense Treaty with America. In Parliament, an attempt to physically prevent ratification failed when the Speaker was carried to the platform and called to order the session that approved the treaty. But rioting continued, forcing cancellation of President Eisenhower's planned visit. A bitter foe of the treaty, socialist leader Asanuma, was fatally stabbed by a right-wing student. Secret reconnaissance of Russia by high-flying American U-2 jets ended when one was downed deep in Soviet territory. Its pilot, Francis Powers, was made the subject of a showcase trial. Powers' family was in the courtroom as Russia began massive exploitation of this propaganda windfall. Powers' conviction was inevitable, and the U-2 affair became Khrushchev's pretext to torpedo the Paris Summit Conference. But Mr. K's ultimatums to the Big Three overplayed his propaganda advantage. At an extraordinary session of the United Nations, Khrushchev continued his boisterous, boorish tactics. Britain's Prime Minister Macmillan was but one of his targets. Chief quarry was Dag Hammarskjöld, who won free men's admiration with his defiance of Russian attacks on his handling of the Congo crisis. In New York for the General Assembly session was the greatest gathering of world leaders in modern times, all vying for the friendship and support of the new African states. One of the most fateful of many informal meetings in New York was that of Khrushchev and Castro, whose threat to Western Hemisphere solidarity was background for Ike's talks with Pan-American leaders. Castro swung closely in line with the communist bloc and seized almost all United States property in Cuba. On the lighter side, in a weighty year, Britain's Princess Margaret shattered tradition to marry a commoner, Anthony Armstrong Jones. Belgium's King Baudouin married Donna Fabiola of Spain, bringing his country its first queen in 25 years. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip proudly introduced Prince Andrew. Japan's Crown Prince Akihito and Princess Michiko celebrated the arrival of little Prince Naruhito. The Shah of Iran and his third wife, Farah Diba, brought joy to the nation with the arrival of a male heir to carry on the dynasty. The birth notice of the year in America was that of John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., soon to be the first baby of the land. 1960 saw historic disasters. An earthquake reduced the Moroccan resort town of Agadir to a shambles overnight. Chile was racked by a series of quakes that took countless lives, left over 1 million homeless, and sent murderous tidal waves racing across the Pacific. Hurricane Donna scourged the Caribbean and the Atlantic coast. 2 airliners collided and fell on New York City in the worst air disaster of all time. Shortly afterward, the supercarrier Constellation burned. It took the greatest disaster force ever assembled in New York to conquer the blaze. In the greatest story of a momentous year, John F. Kennedy defeated GOP standard-bearer Richard Nixon in one of the closest presidential elections on record. The youngest man ever elected president takes the burden from the oldest ever to hold the office as America enters the critical and challenging 60s.